Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video we're going to look at a book that I fell in love with a long time ago when I rented it from a library back in my hometown, which is very, very far away, in elementary school. Now typically when I cover specific minorities, I try to pick authors who are of that minority. In this case, this is more of even though I'm doing it in February during Lunar New Year, the author is very white, but she is known for creating respectful, multicultural books. So, and this is a book I love. So we're going to be looking at Goodbye Vietnam by Gloria Whelan. She's a well-known children's author. She does a lot of stuff. The other book that I currently own is Homeless Bird, which is about an Indian girl. This book is about a little girl who was born in Vietnam, and it tells the story of how her and her family, and then another mother and her daughter, escaped Vietnam, end up in Hong Kong, and how their lives, at least as refugees in Hong Kong before, and this is a spoiler for the book, they're able to get to the United States. Now the main character here is a young girl by the name of May. She is 13 years old. Her grandfather had been trained by the previous Southern Vietnam, so this is South Vietnam government, as a mechanic, and then he taught his son, her father. But after the war ended, basically the police came, the government, the new North Vietnamese government for United Vietnam came and took his grandfather away, and he was never seen again. And for a brief time, his father was taken away for about a year, and then he was able to come back. They're very, very poor. Their village is basically, they're rice farmers. That's what his father pretends to be. He doesn't talk about his mechanics training. The tools are hidden under the floorboards of their house, under the altar stones, so they're completely hidden. He doesn't talk about it. But somebody in another village knew about his grandfather, about May's grandfather, and mentioned to a man who was basically taking refugees on an old boat and needed those skills. So that's how they're escaping. Now, her mother's brother and his family had disappeared and gotten to Hong Kong, and they had sent a postcard back and telling them, we've got to Hong Kong, we're going to Chicago. We're going to be leaving to Chicago soon. So that's one of the reasons they leave, because they think they can get out of Hong Kong and get to the United States to essentially freedom. Her grandmother practices folk magic and folk healing, and the government does not like that because they're kind of anti-religion and crazy little old ladies. So they keep her parents believe that there's a risk they're going to come and take her grandmother away, and she's a crazy little old lady. So she doesn't necessarily want to leave, but her son and her daughter-in-law are like, we're going to die. We need to leave because we're starving to death. Because when her father was away, she talks about how they had nothing but frogs and maybe a little bit of old rice. So they're starving. Her mother tells her in the beginning of the book that things are becoming more and more expensive and it's more and more difficult to live. She doesn't like that May has to get out of school and work the rice fields, as well as her little sister. And she does have a baby brother who's, I think, a toddler in this story. He's maybe 3 or 4. Her sister, I think, is about 8 or 9, and then she's 13. So they're escaping. Her mother wants her child in school, and they don't want to starve to death. So they leave. That's the first part of this story, is you have basically the village. So this is where they start. And then the journey. So they arrive in another town, so they have to walk, and they're in a waiting house where people are going to basically, smugglers, and these are people smugglers. So in that house is another woman around May's mother's age and her daughter Kim. They were intellectuals because she's a doctor, and the daughter plays music. So, and her husband was taken away, probably killed. She understands that, and she knows she has to get out to protect her and her child. So she essentially in order to get on the boat, has given them all pretty much everything she has. And they still want a little bit more, so she offers her daughters, I believe it's a flute. And her daughter plays it, and they're like, nah, we're not going to take this, because she plays it very, very well. So they're able to get on the boat anyway. And in fact, when May's mother is told to come work on the engine, he's like, I need to bring my family too. Well, May calls this older doctor, female doctor, and her daughter, her aunt and cousin, and brings them aboard with them as members of their family in order to let them on the boat faster so they could get spots. So they're on this boat. Her father's periodically working below on the engine. There, I believe her grandmother signals like, no, we need to stay on the deck because we need fresh air. So they stay on deck of this rickety little boat, and they're traveling, I think, for a couple of weeks, if not a month, to get to Hong Kong. They do pick up a kid who was part of a shipwreck, and they rescue him from the sea. He does end up going back to Vietnam because they arrived in the Silver City, i.e. Hong Kong, which is the next, essentially you have the village, the journey, and then the voyage, which is the shipment, and then the last chapter is the Silver City. So they're put in what amounts to be warehouses. That's the refuge, basically. It's a warehouse where they're storing refugees. And that's where her family is. Her and her family have basically a pallet, like a huge wooden pallet where they're kind of living, and they have curtains around it. And they eat communally with everybody else. I don't think she talks about how they go to the bathroom. And then Kim and her mother, I think, are on the one above them. So now Kim's mother is, again, a doctor. So they're there. They start taking English classes. At least they try, but they're stuck inside. I mean, they're stuck in a giant warehouse. The boy they'd rescued decides, because they're periodically offering, it's like, we'll send people home. We'll send you back to Vietnam because we want to get rid of you because you're clouding things up, and they don't necessarily want them. Now, Hong Kong is primarily controlled by the English at this point. So, again, but still, they're refugees. So, time passes. Kim's mother tries to help a man, and essentially, he has appendicitis, and the people at the camp won't listen. They finally get a regular doctor in, and the people are proven wrong. So they're mad. This guy's rescued, but they send Kim's mother, basically they're going to kick her out. So she disappears. She hides Kim with her daughter with May's family. So it's like she can't basically protect her child, and she disappears. You don't know what happens to her. Then basically they get a message that May's uncle in Chicago has essentially realized I can't remember how they found out, but he finds out they're there. They probably let them know that, okay, we're related to these people. And so they're getting sponsorship to go to join her uncle in Chicago. So Kim comes with them. So they all start taking English classes and preparing to leave, and they get on a bus. And this is the end of the book. And at a specific stop, when they're picking up more people, Kim's mom gets on board. So what she ended up doing, she ended up in another camp, and there was an American doctor. And she spoke very good English. She's able to, I think she fakes getting illness and is able to talk to him, tells him what happened, and lets him know her experience and what she did with her daughter. And so he was going to sponsor her to go to the United States. So she joins them at the end of the book. And that's how it ends. So they're basically going to get on a plane to go to America. And so, yes, it kind of tells what happens, and that's kind of the end of it. So they pass the fields, and then they see planes that are so large you couldn't believe it. And soon they would be in the sky. And that's kind of how the book ends. It ends with them getting into being able to get out of Hong Kong, away from Vietnam, and into the US. And that's how the book ends. So it's a good little story. It's not very long. It only goes to 135 pages, and that's just this last little bit. So it's not a long book. It's a very good book. It's for homeschoolers if you're looking at refugee situations, if you're looking at the aftermath of the Vietnam War and poverty and kind of the results of communism, because you see their families extremely poor and things are getting more and more expensive because the government owns anything. Now, I do not believe that's the way it still is in Vietnam. I don't think they're similar to China. They're not that full strict communist where the government controls everything. I'm pretty sure I'm not wrong. I think my husband's visited there. So there's only a few countries that are really strict communism where the government controls everything and there's no capitalism at all. Cuba's one of them. But this is a great story. It really does. You get to know this character and her family, and particularly the desolation on the boat, the starvation, the same with basically you're locked inside in a giant warehouse for months on end. A lot of times they talk about they're just sleeping all the time because they have nothing else to do. They do offer English classes, but they're desolate and they feel like they've escaped one nightmare for another. So it's difficult, and it really captures that. And just the darkness and the depression and the desperation of this refugee girl and her family, as well as this single mother and her daughter who were trying to escape a country where they would either starve to death or be killed. So in order to have a better life. So I really enjoy this book. I really enjoy this author. Again, I have another one of her books called Homeless Bird, which I will cover on this channel. That's about a girl who lives in India and about their interesting marriage practices. Again, I'll get to that book. But this book I fell in love with. This is the first book of this author I have read. Homeless Bird is the other. I have not read any more of her books, but she's a well-known children's book author who writes some great stuff. So there's not much else to say. I would highly recommend this book. I'm guessing this is why you could probably read it in middle school and high school. Level-wise, this is late elementary. Late elementary, probably middle school age. Great story to use when you're talking about refugee situations. The aftermath of, say, the Vietnam War and different cultural problems when you have refugee crises and what other countries have to deal with them when they're packed with these boat people and these refugees, and how desolate and desperate these people have to be to get out of their countries. They don't choose it. This is not something May's family would wanted to do, but they were starving to death. Her father could have been arrested and killed at any time. So could her grandmother. And then most likely the rest of the family would have starved to death. So they had no future. So they were desperate and they escaped. And then they were basically almost imprisoned to an extent until they got very, very lucky and were able to get to the United States. And it's a version of hope, but also shows the desperation of what you have to do to leave your home for a better life. Because it's like, we're gonna take a risk on this rickety old boat to possibly get out of being basically starving to death. It's like you either die and starve to death and be imprisoned, or die on the sea, or just kind of live a desolate life in a refugee camp. Those are your choices. So they take the risk and got lucky and got out. But it's a great book. It is very definitely, the book is ranged late elementary would be the youngest. There's nothing wrong with reading this aloud. Earlier elementary might find this interesting because there is a little brother, there's a little sister. It depends on what you want to teach them. So there's nothing wrong with it. Preschoolers aren't going to find this story interesting at all. So, but that's about it for this book review. Again, this is Goodbye Vietnam by Gloria Whelan. If you like this review, check out the rest of my channel. I do a lot of children's book reviews, a lot of family film reviews, some other educational stuff. This is mostly a secular homeschooling channel, which is why I bring that stuff up. I do some homeschooling videos. I've done some of those. I've also done a few kids travel videos as well. So if you like what you see, like and subscribe. Thank you.